Okay. So today I'm going to explain you about the work group and the Active Directory. So I was explaining, no, I mean, as a prerequisite, the post-build activities list, we have one thing, right, which is domain joining. So today I'm going to explain you about what do you mean by work group and what do you mean by domain environment and what is the difference between both and why everybody always try to go for domain environment, not being in the work group. I mean, they don't like to be in the work group. Why? Correct. Now we would like to understand why. Okay, today. So, one second. Yeah. See, let us understand first what you mean by work group. Okay. Any idea what you mean by work group? Yesterday we discussed little. Maybe we can have it more deeper today. Okay. What do you mean by work group? I explained yesterday, right? Work group means you can see the picture here, okay, right below. Okay. If you look at this picture, right, we call this as work group. Here you have four servers or the four computers, okay, all the four computers are interconnected. There is a switch in between and we have four computers. The computer 1 can talk to computer 2, computer 2 can talk to computer 3, computer 3 can talk to computer 4, and among any of the order, okay, 1 to 4, 4 to 3, or 1 to 3, anything, okay, they are centrally connected. Means the computers are peer to peer connected. Means if you have 10 servers or 10 computers in the network, all the 10 computers can talk to the remaining 9 computers and they even exchange the data. You can copy data from one server to another server and another server to some other server, okay, like that. The communication is there, the transaction can be enabled, and even you can move the data from one computer to another computer, correct, right? But here we have one challenge. The challenge is the administration and the security. Imagine if this machine is not there in the work group, correct, right? We create the user account, maybe admin, like that one user account will create in all the computer. If I know that username and password, I can access remaining 9 computers and delete the data or modify the data, or even I can shut down the computer if I know the username and password, because that is not managed by in the Active Directory or in the central store, that is managed in the local computer or the local system. Correct? Now, yesterday I gave you an example. You have a computer, okay? You have an account. You when you log in, you will use your username and password. But once the computer logs in, right, you can see the D drive, E drive, and the data which is inside that computer. Correct? Now, means you can also see, and maybe your brother or sister, she or he will log into the computer with his own username and password. Even though he logs in with his own username and password, correct? Now he will be able to see the data whatever you copied there. So there is no security. That is the first and foremost thing. Another big difference is the administration burden. Okay, the administration burden means imagine you have 100 computers in the environment. Okay, there is a sudden client visit happens, or maybe some your boss or your MD is coming. You want everybody to have the wallpaper changed in all the 100 computers. They will give you one wallpaper, okay, maybe welcome to the Bangalore office or welcome to the Hyderabad office, okay, some greetings message should be there, and whenever he passes in the office, right, he should be able to see the desktop wallpaper, the wishing message, correct, na? So imagine if you don't have a central thing, you have to copy that file, that desktop wallpaper file, in all the 100 computers, log into each and every computer, open the log into the desktop, open the image, right click and say set as background wallpaper, set as wallpaper, set as wallpaper. Imagine you have only one user and 100 computers are there. At least 5 minutes will take for each computer. So 5 minutes into 100, it is 5000 minutes. Correct, na? 5 are 500 minutes. Correct, 500 minutes. 100 computers, right? It is 500 minutes. Means almost Even though you very dedicatedly desperately worked also, at least 2 hours it will take, 2 to 3 hours it will take, correct na? So this is administration burden. So that is the difference, that is the biggest difference between the work group and uh, the domain environment. So if you look at the domain environment in the right side, right, you have one more picture here. Okay, we call it as a domain environment, this one. Here you can see one difference. Here the difference is the computers are connected via network only, correct? Now you have three computers here. Okay, all the three computers are connected to a switch. This is a switch actually. Switch means like you have, I mean, in your house, the power socket will be there, no? One wire will come there, and you will get divided into multiple sockets. One for fan, one for TV, one for maybe something else, right? One empty will also be there. So it divides one network connection into multiple network connections. Means you can connect multiple devices into one switch to establish the communication. That is a switch. Okay. Then if you look at here, we have another other device called server. This is the server. And if you see here, all the computers are connected to this switch, and the switch is connected to this server. Now what we will do, instead of create, I told you here you have a user created, here you have a user created, here you also have a user created, here also you have a user created. But in case of domain, it is not like that. We will not create the users in the local computers. We will not create the users into local computers. Means this will not be there. We will create the user, instead of creating in the local PC, we will create it in the server here. Okay, we will create here, we will create here. Means the user accounts are created inside here. Say for example, you are working in IT department, okay, Bangalore office. Here you will create user 1, user 2, user 3. Once the user ID is created, we will grant access. Yesterday, if you remember, I granted access to Ashok. I created the user account in the Active Directory domain controller, like Ashok, but I granted access to this computer, the PC01, right? So you will grant access the user account here. Access is granted here, access is granted here, access is granted here. Okay, so now imagine, since all these computers are stored here, and in the ITOU all the IT users are there, when the boss is coming, when your VIP, when your client is coming, if you want to change wallpaper for all the 100 computers at a time, you will not log into these computers 1 2 3. Okay, what you will do, you will log into this server, Active Directory domain controller, go to this ITOU, right click on this ITOU, there you have a policy, group policy, create a new group policy, and you will just select that wallpaper which is supposed to go to all the computers. Within 1 minute, all that wallpaper will reach all the 1000, 10,000, 100, 1, whatever it is, number may be whatever it is. Okay, all the computers will have the quick wallpaper assigned to that particular computer which are there in that OU. So that is the biggest difference between the work group and the domain environment. Understood now what is the difference, guys?
Yes.
Yeah, means work group means it is decentralized work administration, means the computers are interconnected each other, but the administration, you as an engineer, if you want to manage 100 computers, work group means it is very very difficult. You have to log into each and every computer. But in case of domain, it is not like that. Domain means it is a security boundary. Okay, each and every computer or each and every users are linked in a server, stored in a central store. Okay, that central store we also call it as domain controller or the Active Directory environment. Okay, so now you know the difference. Work group means no security. Okay, work group means decentralized administration, and work group means a lot of work is there, correct na? In case of domain, it is not like that. Domain means it is a security boundary. If you want to access anything and everything, you have to prove your identity, you have to enter your username and password. Okay, and say for example you are logging in here. So here Ashok is trying to log in, example. He will enter his username and password. Okay, here he will enter, but when he enters username and password, the authentication will not be done here. it will just, this computer will send the username and password to this computer, because this is my DC domain controller. So it will just verify whether the Ashok is there. Yes. Whether the password, whatever Ashok is entered, is correct. Yes. Then this computer will give a token to this user Ashok, that is valid for 10 hours. Means once you enter the username and password, your authentication is validated. Then the Active Directory domain controller will give a token. Okay, TGT token, ticket granting ticket. That token will be there, and that token will be valid for 10 hours. So within the 10 hours, again when the Ashok, say for example, Ashok afternoon he'll go for breakfast. I mean break time. Okay, maybe for lunch break or coffee break he'll go. When he comes back and enter the username and password, it will never come and talk to the domain controller, because it is already given one ticket for valid 10 hours. Like you go to film theater, correct? Now the initially you have to show the ticket. Once you get the entry, even if you come in the middle, right, leisure time, if you come out also, you don't have to show the authentication identity, you don't have to show the ticket there. The same policy applicable here. Okay, that is why if you are already working at that, when you started the day early morning or in afternoon, whenever your shift start, right, first time when you enter the username and password, it will take at least 4 to 5 seconds of time to get the authentication done. But when you go for a break and comes back, and then if you enter the username and password, if you enter, it will just logs in, because that time the authentication, the handshaking will not happen, because the first time, the very first login has already completed, and you have the ticket that is valid for 10 hours. Okay, that is how this work group and the domain environment is connected. So now you may have a question. Okay, how can I convert an unsecured workgroup environment into a domain environment? It is very easy. So we have a service called Active Directory Domain Controller, or Active Directory Domain Services, ADDS. So if you install this Active Directory Domain Service role in any of the server operating system, not in the client operating system, okay, whatever services I'm going to talk hereafter, everything will be installed in the server only and not in the client machine. Okay, so as I told you, right? If you want to convert an unsecured workgroup environment into an secured domain environment, you have to install a service called Active Directory Domain Services. Okay. Once you install the Active Directory Domain Services and promote that workgroup server into a secured domain environment, you will be created a domain. So in our previous yesterday's example, I've already created a domain called Microsoft.com. Correct. Na? Then I have created a user called Ashok in the Bangalore ITOU, because Ashok is working in Microsoft, where it is in Bangalore, and in which department? In IT department. So this Active Directory domain controller, I mean, it is just not complete. I mean, convert an unsecured workgroup environment into domain environment. It will also facilitate you to store the data in the hierarchical manner. Means, imagine Microsoft is a very big organization. It's a tycoon in the industry, right? IT industry, and that is the first name comes in everybody's mind when people talks about IT. So we have offices in all over the world. How they will identify? Okay, the user is belongs to Bangalore, the user belongs to Hyderabad, or the user is belongs to Germany, America, India. How they will identify? That is based on the hierarchy that we will store. Okay, so they will, hierarchy means like this. Say for example, let me write here. Imagine this is your Microsoft.com. Microsoft.com. Okay. Under that you have multiple countries like India. And under India maybe Bangalore. Under Bangalore maybe IT department, sales department, okay, HR department, and admin department. Again further IT gets divided, okay, like developer, testing engineer, okay, a programmer, and infrastructure engineer. And again infrastructure gets divided into multiple what, Windows team, Linux team, backup team, correct, now cloud team, like that it gets divided. So when people logs into this Microsoft.com website, right, So they will understand. Say for example, now if they want to check Ashok, they will just search Ashok. Okay, they will just search Ashok in the Active Directory. When they hit enter, Ashok will be somewhere sitting in the IT department here. Okay, in this view. Then they will understand. Okay, Ashok is belongs to Bangalore department. Where is Bangalore? It is in India. That India is there in Microsoft.com. So that is how this hierarchy will help you to understand the users and the objects is belong to which country or the region. Is it clear? Guys, is it clear?
Sir.
Yeah, any question so far? Okay. So that is the difference between a work group and the domain environment. Okay. So now let us move on to the next slide. Okay. Now we will try to understand what you mean by Active Directory. Now I told you, right, you can convert an unsecured work group environment into a secure domain environment by using Active Directory domain services. So what other benefits the Active Directory domain services will give us? Okay. So now you can see here Active Directory means it is an Microsoft proprietary service, means it is owned by Microsoft. Okay, and we also call it as identity and access management tool. Means identity and access management means we can create the user accounts, we can restrict the user to computers and files and folders. Okay, that is why we call it as identity and access management services. I told you now we create the user accounts in not in the local computer, we will create it in the server where the domain controller. And if you remember yesterday we granted access to PC01, right, for Ashok. So where we created user account created in domain controller, but access is granted in the local PC. Correct na? That is why we call it as identity and access management service. Okay. So what are the key benefits of the Active Directory? The key benefits of the Active Directory means it provides centralized authentication. Correct, right? So see here, we have three users are here. Correct na? We have three users are here. When this user, she logs into the early morning, she will log into her PC, right? Imagine her PC is this one. She will enter her username and password. Okay, so when she enter the username and password, it will not be verified here. That password and username will be sent to this Active Directory domain controller. There it will just verify for the authentication or the identification. So there it will just it will verify whether the entered username is correct or not and the password is correct or not. If the password is correct and user is also present, then the authentication is done at the Active Directory. That is why we call it as centralized authentication. Means the user account verification is not done in the local computer. That user account and the authentication is happening in the central server. That central server is nothing but the Active Directory domain controller. Okay, that is why we call it as centralized authentication. And the second one is centralized administration. So I told you, right, in the previously, here all these users, say for example all these users are IT users, Bangalore IT users. Now you want to control, okay, none of these three users, okay, should not be able to connect the pen drive. Okay, you have around 100 users in the Bangalore department. Okay, imagine IT department, and earlier you had an access to insert the pen drive to connect the pen drive to your laptops or the servers, and due to that issue, maybe some virus issue has come recently, and your management tells you please block USB pen drive or USB access for all the users. Okay, currently it is enabled for the IT users and you don't want to anybody to use the pen drive. Okay, imagine you have to log into each and every computer and make the changes, it will take time. So instead of that, you log into the Active Directory domain controller here. Here you logs in. Okay, you log in here. Then go to the OU where the users are there. Just right click, create a new policy. Go to computer settings, administration, and then block USB. Okay, within fraction of minutes, less than a minute, you can disable the pen drive for all the 100 users who are present in the ITOU. So that is called as centralized administration. Means you don't have to log into each and every computer to do the administration. Okay, or you don't have to reach out to any of the user individually to do the administration. Okay, all the administration will be done by just logging into the central store, call it as Active Directory Domain Controller. That is why we call it as that is why we call it as the centralized administration. Okay, and the third one is single sign-on. See, I told you when you logs into the office site to every day morning or when your shift starts, you are entering the username and password to prove your authentication identity. Correct, na? So once you enter the username and password, I told you the ticket granting ticket token will be given to you. Means a ticket will be assigned to you, and that ticket is valid for 10 hours. So since you already proved your authenticity, okay, why to again if you want to open any other application, say for example you logged into your office laptop, okay, so you want to apply leave or you want to check your some other HR policy or whatever it is, okay, company will have application n number of applications for the employees. So since you already proved the authentication, you don't have to enter the username and password for each and every application that you open inside the office laptop, right? So that is called a single sign-on. Means once your authentication is proved, once you enter the username and password, you don't have to enter the username and password for the remaining applications, whatever is SSO enabled. The single sign-on is enabled. Okay, that is what single sign-on means. You don't have to enter the username and password for all the other applications where we have enabled the single sign-on. One login is enough to access all the other applications. That saves a lot of time. Okay, that is the single sign-on. Any question? And the last one is Active Directory Domain Service. See, if you have a server, okay, and if you install the Active Directory Domain Service role, we call that server as a domain controller. Means when I say domain controller, you have to understand that is a Active Directory installed server. Or when I call a DC, that means the same. Or when I call domain service, you have to understand in that we have installed the Active Directory domain services. Okay, so multiple names can be called uh, for the domain controller. Okay, when I say server, maybe in that if the Active Directory is there, we call that server as the domain controller. Okay, so that is the what is the difference between a server and a domain controller. If somebody asks you, you have to tell that is also a server in which we have installed the Active Directory domain controller domain services role. That is why we call it as domain controller. Very simple. Clear? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is very, very important, guys, because going forward, I will talk new terminologies and new words actually. So it is very essential to understand. Okay. So since I talk about the Active Directory domain services, right? I want you to know before I get into the actual topics. So there are two types of components in the Active Directory. Okay. The two types of components, one is physical component, another one is logical component. What do you mean by physical component? Any idea what do you mean by physical component? You have a laptop in front of you. Is it physical or logical or virtual?
Phy- Physical, sir.
It is physical. Why it is physical?
Because we can feel it. Touch it.
Exactly. The components which you can touch and feel. We call such components as physical components. Correct, na? And
Yes.
now we have connected on virtual because I'm sitting somewhere, you are sitting somewhere. With the help of internet and with the help of some tool, we are collaborated here or we have gathered here, correct na? And that gathering place we call it as a meeting room. See, ideally meeting room in the sense there should be some room and we all should be there inside, correct na? But here this is imaginary or it is in logical or it is in virtual room, correct na? Because we can only feel it, imagine it, you cannot feel it. I mean, you cannot touch it, you can only imaginarily feel it, correct, right? That is why we call it as logical. Means physical component means the components which you can touch and feel. Okay, such components we call it as physical components. And logical means you can only imagine, correct na? You can only imagine such components we call it as logical components. Now let us understand what are all the physical components we have in the Active Directory? Okay, so there are four physical components in the Active Directory. Okay, the very first component we call it as root domain controller. Means the very first domain, the very first domain controller which you installed in the domain, right? Say for example, you started an organization. Okay, so that organization name can be okay, mybusiness.com. You started one company called mybusiness.com that got started in Bangalore. Here it is in Bangalore. You have a server and you have created a new domain. Okay, and the domain controller name is dc01 dot mybusiness.com. This is your first domain controller. Since it is our first domain controller, we call it as RDC, root domain controller. And later your business started giving good mileage, okay, and you are making good name and you wanted to establish your company, okay, and you're getting more demand from the Hyderabad location. Okay, in Hyderabad also you wanted to start an office in the Hyderabad. Almost around 500 employees you are hiring. Here initially you started with 10 employee, now it is reached 2000 employee example. So the same thing happening now, you are opening another office in Hyderabad. Okay, there. Okay, imagine when the user, if you're opening the, if you're opening the office in Hyderabad, okay, there around 2000 users are there. Imagine if there is no domain controller in the Hyderabad office. Here if you don't have domain controller, okay, if the users are logs in from here, Hyderabad office, right, that username and password and the application request will always try to reach here, where, the Bangalore location. It is very time consuming and the delay will be there. When the user enter the username and password, that should go to your router, and that router should send it to your vendor edge servers, and from there it should travel all the way to the Bangalore edge, and then from Bangalore edge your vendor provided edges, and then to your computer. Correct? Na? So delay will be there. It will take at least, the logs in will take at least 2 to 3 seconds. See, in IT, 2 to 3 seconds is very, very huge. People will start complaining, my computer is very slow, even though this is 3 seconds. Okay. It should happen like click, tuck, tuck, tuck should happen. That is what IT means. Because IT means it is super speed. So now you notice that there is a network glitch or there is a network delay since you don't have the domain control in the Hyderabad. And one more thing, you already have 2000 users here in Bangalore office. Another 500 users if you put here, so 2500 users is huge for this domain controller to process. Correct? Huh? So what you wanted to do, you wanted to add an additional domain controller to suffice or to fulfill the Hyderabad location users requirement, and also to share the load between this Bangalore domain controller and the Hyderabad domain controller. So what you will do, you will add an additional domain controller here. Okay, you add an, so dc02 dot mybusiness.com, you will create it in the Hyderabad office. Now the users will never go this path. Okay, they will just come and talk to the Hyderabad domain controller only, and this Hyderabad and Bangalore domain controller will be in the, they will be in connect. Okay, so now you see the authentication will be happening here only in the Hyderabad itself, here only. Okay, it won't go there. So that saves time. Since I'm adding an additional domain controller, correct now? So the additional domain controller, sorry. Oh, okay, that's okay. That is my mistake. Since I'm adding an additional domain controller to take the balance, I mean take the load or the balance the load, we call it as additional domain controller. That is your second physical component. Okay. Now the third physical component is the third physical component is child domain controller. So imagine now your business is all over the India. Now you wanted to you are thinking to start an office in the overseas. Maybe you are starting your office in the US. Correct, na? USA, you are starting an office. So you may already know Each and every country has have its own rules and regulations. Correct, right? Means you should not transfer the data from one country to another country, or you should the policy of the America will be different. The business policy of India is different. So since that is there, you cannot have a same firm name in the USA also. So you cannot leverage the existing domain in the USA also. So that is why what you will do, you will create an additional domain, okay, or we call it as child domain in the USA. So in the USA, what you will do, you will create a new domain called usa.mybusiness.com. That is a new domain, guys. usa.mybusiness.com. Like you have india.microsoft.com, usa.microsoft.com, or germany.microsoft.com. Okay, this is a domain. So if you create a new domain like that, right? So we call it as child domain. The parent will be mybusiness.com. And if you see here also my business is there, here also my business is there, here also my business is there. See, since it is only mybusiness.com, this is your root domain. And since it is usa.microsoft.com, we call it as USA as a child for mybusiness.com domain. Or if you take Microsoft as an example, USA is your child and Microsoft.com is your root domain. Okay, such domains we call it as child domains. Okay, clear? Clear or not?
Yes, sir.
Clear.
Okay. Now the fourth one is read-only domain controller. Okay. So read-only domain controller, it is nothing but similar to the root domain controller and the additional domain controller only, but it is the copy of the any of the domain controller, but it doesn't exhibit anything write operations. Means, say for example, now you are starting an office in my Mangalore office. 1 second. Yeah. Okay. Imagine you have an office. Mangalore office is there. So in Mangalore, we have shipyards, correct? Huh? So all your business related raw materials will come in ship. Okay. To take care of that, you have a small office in Mangalore. Maybe around 5 to 10 users are there. Okay. Small office is there. Only 5 users are there. So imagine only for 5 users, if you want to have a big server, that includes a lot of investment, and that requires additional licensing investment, that requires data center, like you should have a AC to cool that, and you should also need one engineer to maintain it. So your company wanted to avoid that investment. What they will do, they will just deploy one small server there. Okay, maybe 3 4 GB RAM, like some small server there. Okay, so they will make this as an read-only domain controller, what we call it as read-only domain controller. So this read-only domain controller have an uh, it is how it works. It will just pull the copy of the user and the object information both from Hyderabad and Bangalore, and it will stores here. Means it is a copy of the Hyderabad and Bangalore domain controller. Okay, see, all the domain controllers are identical. I'll show you. If you have whatever folder structure is there in this DC01, the 100% replica is there in the Hyderabad also. Okay, if you have 10 domain controllers in the environment for the same domain called mybusiness.com, all the 10 domain controllers are identical only. The folder structure, the user, everything is identical, and all the 10 are in synchronization. If you delete a user in the DC01, which is your Bangalore office, the same user will be deleted in the remaining 9 domain controller which are there in the environment. Example. Okay, if you deleted a folder, that folder will be deleted in the entire 9 or 10 domain controller whatever you have in your environment. So this RODC will have the replica of the domain controller, but you cannot create a user, you cannot even reset a password, only the authentication will be served. Imagine if you don't have a domain controller in the Mangalore office. When the users in the Mangalore office, right, when they enter the username, name and password, it should always travel to Bangalore office and take the authentication. So the delay is there. So to avoid that delay, we just created a RODC in the Mangalore office itself, so that the user will be authenticated in the office itself. Quicker it will be, very quicker it will be. Okay, and then later the synchronization will happen between the remaining domain controllers. Correct, na? So this read-only domain controller will have only the read copy of the data. You cannot create, you cannot modify, you cannot delete anything. There is no write operations at all in the read-only domain controller. Only the reading option will be there. Okay, you can see how many users are there, you can see which group is there, what group is belongs to, all those only reading thing can be done. No administration things happens in the read only domain controller. That is called as the fourth component, read only domain controllers. So now you understood there are four physical components. Root domain controller, which is your very first domain controller. Okay, if you created a new company, the very first domain controller or the server will call it as root domain controller. Second one is additional domain controller. To balance the load of Hyderabad and Bangalore and to reduce the latency, you have an additional server added in Hyderabad location. Such domain controller we call it as additional domain controller. That is your second component. And the child domain controller. If you add an additional domain, okay, we call such domain as child domain. In our example, we have mybusiness.com, which is our parent domain, and you created a new office in USA. Then you will call it as usa.mybusiness.com. That USA is your child domain, and mybusiness.com is your root domain. And the fourth one is read only domain controller. It is the replica or the copy of the domain controller which is there, the read any of the writable domain controller, right? It is a copy of the writable domain controller, but the read only domain controller will not allow you to make any changes. No write operations, only read operations can be performed there. And now you know the context why we have RODC, to reduce the latency, increase the performance, correct na, and to avoid the additional investments. Okay, that is what the physical components. And the logical components, any questions so far, guys? Any questions
No.
so far? Okay, so this is very very important actually. Last slide, I will stop after this. Okay, the logical components means it is like imaginary components. Okay, so say for example, if you look at a problem, the resolution, the logic for the logic for resolving that issue is different to you, and that is different to me, correct na? The way I look at the problem is different, the way you look at the problem is different, correct na? Means that is logical, means that varies from person to person. It is correct, right? It varies from person to person. So here when I say forest, see, the logical components, physical components, both are same only. Okay, the context is different. Okay, now well, let me explain. There are four logical components. One is forest, tree, domains, and OU. So forest means what? Any idea what you mean by forest? What do you mean by forest? Guys, what do you mean by forest? Hmm? What do you mean by forest, guys? Have you ever seen forest? Yes or no?
Group of trees and animals.
Okay, very good. So in our village we have a forest. Means you mean forest means you have group of trees, animals, rivers, waterfalls, everything, correct now? Forest means if you want to call it as a forest, you should have all these things. But next to my village I have a forest, there only trees are there, no animals, no rivers, no waterfalls, no trekking happens there. Can we call that still as a forest?
No, sir.
No, huh?
No.
Okay, how come no?
Because everywhere we can see trees, na, sir. We
Ah,
can see
correct.
trees in cities also. So
Okay.
how can it be a forest?
Okay, fine then. So in our village, okay, we have one big place, no trees at all. We have a lot of animals. We have river flowing there. We have hill, no trees in the hill. Okay, only small grasses kind of things are there. Falls is also there. Can you call that as a forest? But no trees there.
Can, yeah, I
Sorry,
think we can call it, sir.
can you call that where there is no trees at all? Can you still call that as a forest?
No, sir, we call a desert sometimes.
Yeah, means see, forest means whether you have animals, whether you don't have animals, or whether you have falls, whether you don't have falls. Okay, I- if the trees are there, the thick trees are there, means that we call it as a forest. Means forest means a group of trees. That's all. Forest means group of trees. Okay, here when I call forest, forest means collection of trees dedicated. I mean, it will have a dedicated namespace. Okay, here, say for example, I was talking about Microsoft.com. Okay, and you have India.microsoft.com, and you have USA.microsoft.com, and you have Australia.microsoft.com. So imagine this is a tree. Sorry for drawing tree like that. So there are multiple trees are there. Okay, see these all together trees, right? Can we call it as a forest?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that is what I'm talking about here. Logical components means it is the collection of trees. Okay, the trees means it is each domain. India is a tree, USA is a tree, okay, Australia is a tree, and Microsoft is a tree. Okay, so forest means it is collection of trees, and tree means it is group of domains. Okay, India.microsoft.com is a domain, Australia.microsoft.com is a domain, and USA.microsoft.com is also a domain. Correct? Now, when you club all these domains together, we call that as a forest, and the forest name is Microsoft.com. If you see here, collection of trees with a dedicated domain name represented. And if you see in all the forests or all the trees, you have one thing common, which is Microsoft.com. Correct? Huh? Here Microsoft.com is common, Microsoft.com is common, Microsoft.com is common. So that is called as the dedicated domain name represented. Okay, so this is the collection of, I mean, forest means collection of trees. Tree means it is group of domains with continuous namespace in the forest. Okay, and the last one is domain. So domain you already know. Domain from the day one only I'm telling. Domain means it is a security boundary. Correct? Now where you have to prove, if you want, if you want to access anything and everything, you have to prove your authentication. Correct? You have to enter your username and password. You have to prove your whether you are a valid person or a genuine person or a legitimate person or not. Correct? Now that is called as domain. Domain means it's a security boundary. That's all. And OU means it is the organizational units or the folder structure in the Active Directory. Okay, so say for example here you have a domain called Microsoft.com. This is your domain. Under that you have OU called India. Under that you have subfolder called IT. Under that you have subfolder called HRs, programmers, and admins. Okay, this is the OU structure. Means OU means it is organizational unit. Okay, or we also call it as a folder structure in the Active Directory to store the classes and attributes. Classes means your computer, your user account, all those things. Attributes means the properties of it. So when I call my name as class Manjunath TG, my property means my first name, last name, my mobile number, my address. Those are the attributes. Okay, so like that. So classes and attributes. So this is what the logical components. Any questions, guys, so far? Hmm? Any questions? So silence is
No,
no.
sir.
Yeah, thank you. Silence is no. I think too much for the day. So tomorrow we will try to recall it again little bit. Okay, and then start. And I will share you the notes today in the group. Just no, go through the group, I mean notes once.